back, friends. I trust you've been eagerly anticipating the conclusion to Mystery in Pimlico. If you watched last week, you will have noticed that I had a situation develop as I was concluding the episode. As we ended, it became apparent that I was drugged in some manner. I believe my glass of whiskey was somehow tampered with. Anyway, what happened after that was most disconcerting. My head apparently hit the table. Oddly, all of this was foretold in the letter I'd received the previous week. Do you remember? It read, "Ask not for why the bell creaks, or you'll be sent forthwith to sleep." Fortunately, the crew and our wonderful director, Astrid, were there and provided assistance and took me for observation at the local hospital emergency room. They are still trying to assess what may have been put into my drink, which seems the only plausible explanation. Hi, Astrid. Waving to me again. Yes, indeed. Let's begin. I'm sure you've been thinking, surely it couldn't have been suicide, could it? What was the motive for Adelaide or Dyson? Or was there something else involved in this? No doubt you've arrived at your conclusions about this mystery and are now eager to find out. So, let's return, shall we?
Towards the end of November, Edwin Bartlett was taken ill. He had been in pain for several days, but was reluctant to give in, until one morning he found himself unable to leave his bed. Upon the recommendation of the Doggets, Dr. Leach, a local man, was called in.
Now, open your mouth wide, please, Mr. Bartlett. The teeth are in a very bad state.
Yes, but it must be more than that, Doctor. He's never had a day's illness since I've known him.
Quite. I notice a distinct blueness around the gums, almost suggestive of mercury. Or tell me, has he been taking any medicine or other treatments?
Not that I know of.
Oh, my stomach. I am so ill.
Just lie quietly, Mr. Bartlett.
I've just remembered, Doctor. He did have a pill the day before yesterday.
A pill? What kind of a pill, madam?
It was from a box of samples sent to us some time ago. He was in pain and asked me to give him something. It said on the box they were for internal complaints.
May I see the box?
Certainly. It's still in my medicine chest. Over here.
Quite an elaborate affair. You understand medicine, Mrs. Bartlett?
Well, when I was expecting a child, that was some years ago now, we had a nurse staying in the house for several weeks beforehand. She taught me quite a bit. This is the box, Doctor. The pills vary in size, as you can see. I gave him the largest.
I thought so. They are blue pills containing mercury.
Oh.
You must forgive me. Remember, we are strangers. I know nothing of your husband's medical history. However, elimination is half the battle.
You're a clever doctor. I can see that.
The one pill can have done no harm, and since the pain was already there beforehand, we must look for some other cause.
I'll wait in the next room, Doctor.
Thank you, madam. Now, just lie back, Mr. Bartlett, and let's give you a thorough examination.
Well, Dr. Leach?
There's no cause for alarm, madam, none whatever. Your husband is merely suffering from an irritation of the duodenum. That is a form of gastric trouble. He tells me he has always been a big eater.
And a fast one. I've been warning him for years.
Some people only learn by experience, eh? He also shows evident signs of nerve strain from overwork.
Oh, yes. He has been working much too hard as of late.
Complete rest and diet, and we'll have him right in no time.
Oh, thank you, Doctor.
And of course, at the first opportunity, he must see a dentist. In the meantime, this prescription should bring immediate relief. Oh, it is chlorate of potash, bismuth, with a tincture of nux vomica to be administered twice daily. I'll look in again tomorrow.
Thank you, Doctor.
But remember, keep away from that little medicine chest of yours.
Answer the front door, please, Doggett. Alice is out, and my hands are full.
Oh, all right.
Good evening. You must be Mr. Doggett.
Correct.
I've been here often enough the last 2 months, but this is the first time I've had the pleasure of meeting you.
Ah, you'll be the minister for upstairs.
Correct. And how is Mr. Bartlett today?
Getting along, they tell me. Best go up and see for yourself. I take it you know the way up by now?
Thank you. Charming house you have, Mr. Doggett.
We've been taking lodgers for 10 years or more and never had no complaints.
And, of course, there is a church just around the corner. Most convenient.
Well, if you care to put it that way.
You, attend divine service, Mr. Doggett?
Only when me business takes me there.
Your business? Oh, I see you are a church warden or sexton, perhaps?
I am neither.
Then might I be so inquisitive as to ask, what is your business, Mr. Doggett?
I am an undertaker.
Oh.
Under Dr. Leach's treatment, Edwin Bartlett began to recover his physical health, but not so that of his mind. Strangely enough, this man, who hitherto had scorned the very thought of illness, now began to show all the signs of a hypochondriac. Although pronounced as good as cured by Dr. Leach, he steadfastly refused to leave his bed. That bed, throughout the illness, had been made up in the living room, between the window and the fireplace, and Adelaide had been in constant attendance.
I can't understand it, Dr. Leach. Oh, if you'd only known him before all of this. I've never seen anyone so changed.
And now, Mrs. Bartlett, to the best of my knowledge, you've spent 13 nights running in a chair at the foot of your husband's bed. If you keep that up, we shall have 2 invalids in the house. Why not engage a trained nurse? I can recommend a...
Oh, he wouldn't hear of it. He wouldn't even go to sleep unless I'm sitting there with my hands on his feet. Besides, do you think I'd get any sleep in the next room, knowing that he was up and walking about like a ghost?
And does he do that?
Oh, yes. It seems he can't sleep for any more than an hour at a time.
You've given him the bromides?
If anything, they seem to have a reverse effect.
That is rare, but by no means unprecedented. There is something else on your mind, Mrs. Bartlett?
Well, yes. It is what people are saying.
People?
My father-in-law, for one, and Mr. Baxter, my husband's partner. They're saying it's all my fault, that I'm keeping him here and won't let anyone see him. But it isn't true, Dr. Leach, you know that. He doesn't want to see anybody.
Yes, of course. Perhaps it would be as well to call in a second opinion.
Oh, he wouldn't hear of that either. He's told me so. He has a tremendous faith in you, Dr. Leach. Come in.
Mr. Dyson's here, ma'am.
Oh, will you excuse me, Doctor? Please go in to my husband. He's expecting you.
It was not until a day or 2 after Christmas that Edwin Bartlett showed signs of reverting to his old, normal self. Perhaps the thought of having missed the season's fair was in some measure responsible. At any rate, December 28th saw him up and about and even discussing meals with Mrs. Doggett. On the evening of that day, Dyson called and took Adelaide for a walk along the embankment.
You are cold. You should have brought a warmer coat.
No, I'm all right.
Then,
George, will you do something for me?
were I Hercules, I would undertake more than 12 labors on your account, my sweet Adelaide.
This calls for no fast of strength. I want you to buy me some liquid chloroform.
Chloroform.
See, you have not even the trust of a Hercules.
But Adelaide, chloroform?
Neither do you care, it seems, if I am robbed of my sleep night after night. Oh, Edwin is better, yes, but he cannot sleep for any more than an hour at a time. Wasn't so bad when he kept to his bed, but now he spends half the night stalking up and down the room like a ghost. And it frightens me. For the first time in my life, I'm afraid of Edwin.
My poor Adelaide.
Bromades have no effect. But if I had some chloroform, I could make him sleep. I know I could. Annie Walker, the nurse I was telling you about, she used it on me, and I know how it's done with a handkerchief. It's quite safe.
Well, surely if you were to ask Dr. Leach.
No, he'd never trust me with it. Besides, he might not understand. In the same way the chemists here all know me and would be sure to ask difficult questions. Whereas you... Please, George, do this for me?
Well...
Here's a silver. Get as much as you can, liquid chloroform. Remember, it is only sold in very small quantities, but don't go to any of the chemists in this district, or Dr. Leach may get to know somehow and be angry.
Mr. Dyson, sir. Well, a treat to see you back in Merton.
Oh, I couldn't pass through without dropping in, Mr. Humble. Even if it were not for the pleasure of seeing you, the bottles in a chemist's shop have always fascinated me from childhood.
In that case, sir, perhaps I can dispose of some of their contents to you.
Well, as a matter of fact, you can. I require a bottle of chloroform, liquid chloroform.
Chloroform?
Yes. The fact is, I have some rather bad grease stains on my cassock, and nothing else will remove them, I'm sure.
Liquid chloroform is dangerous stuff, Mr. Dyson.
Oh, have no fear. I've used it before for the purpose.
Well, let me see. I've a bottle here containing ½ an ounce.
Is that the largest quantity you have?
Or there's a 1 ounce bottle at 2 6 That'll be more than enough for your purposes, sir.
Oh, to be sure.
1 ounce of liquid chloroform. You know, Mr. Dyson, we miss your preaching here in our little chapel.
At 2 other chemists in the Putney area, Dyson also obtained similar bottles of liquid chloroform. He poured the contents of all 3 into 1 large bottle, which he duly handed to Adelaide on the morning of December 31st. In the afternoon of that day, Adelaide accompanied Dr. Leach and her husband to the dentist, where, under anaesthetic, Edwin Bartlett had a tooth extracted. Back at Claverton Street, Dr. Leach took his departure.
You know, Mr. Bartlett, you're the most remarkable patient that has ever crossed my professional path. The way you resisted that nitrous oxide gas this afternoon. Apart from anything else, it proves beyond all doubt that your full stamina has returned.
Oh, as I've said many times before, you are a clever doctor and you know your job.
You have your good lady to thank for it all just as much as me.
And don't I know it?
Nevertheless, it was a lucky day for us when you came on the scene, Dr. Leach.
Thank you, madam. Well, I must hurry back to my surgery, and remember, I don't want to see you again, Mr. Bartlett. That is, professionally, of course. It remains but for me to wish you both a happy new year.
And the
And
same
Dr.
to you,
Leach.
Dr. Leach.
The hot water, ma'am.
Mr. Bartlett is already in bed. The visit to the dentist has tired him, and I'm hoping he'll sleep well tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, what time is it, Alice? I forgot to wind my watch.
Just turned 10 o'clock, ma'am.
Thank you. I shan't want anything more. Good night, Alice, and a very happy new year.
Thank you, ma'am. And the same to you and Mr. Bartlett, I'm sure.
We'll raise a cup of kindness yet for days of old lang syne. Oh, well, end of an old year and the beginning of a new. I wonder what's in store. That's it, you never know what's in store.
The new year is already several hours old, Doggett. If we're to get any sleep, we'd best go to bed.
Just finish off the bottle first. Bad luck to leave a bottle half empty on...
That's Mrs. Bartlett. Come, Doggett, quick!
It's Mr. Bartlett. He's dead.
Dead!
sure of it.
What happened, ma'am? I heard a scream.
Alice, please run and one for Dr. Leach. Hurry.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just get a coat.
May we go in?
Oh, yes, yes, of course.
Dead all right. Some time, too, if I know anything.
This is terrible.
Oh, I can't bear to look at him lying there with his mouth wide open.
Smells like a hospital in here.
I see the fire is freshly made up.
Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do?
Oh, there, dear. There's nothing you can do. Just come downstairs and rest a while.
No, no, I must wait for Dr. Leach.
This is unbelievable. Why, only a few hours ago I pronounced him a fit man. He must have burst a blood vessel, or possibly there was an aneurysm that I overlooked. But your husband has been dead for some hours, Mrs. Bartlett. I put it at 3 to 4 hours. How did this happen?
He seemed tired after the visit to the dentist and was in bed before 10 o'clock. For the first time in weeks, I thought he was going to sleep tonight. But he insisted on me sitting in the armchair with my hands on his feet, as usual, and I must have dozed off myself in that position. It was a cramp in one arm that awoke me, and I was horrified to find him, very cold and very still. In a panic, I poured some brandy into that tumbler on the mantelpiece and tried to force it down his throat. It was only then that I realized that he was dead.
I feel deeply for you, madam.
There was a strong odor in the room, Doctor, when the wife and I first came up here. Ether or some such. Tain't so noticeable now.
Ether? Yes, that would no doubt be the chlorodyne. I see the bottle on the mantelpiece is empty. Did your husband take a dose of it tonight, Mrs. Bartlett?
I don't know. Possibly.
Possibly while you were asleep. He could have reached it off the mantelpiece without getting out of bed and disturbing you. That would certainly account for the chloral odor, Mr. Doggett.
Poor Mrs. Bartlett. New Year's Eve, too.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett, Mrs. Doggett.
When you've had a word with her, Doctor, bring her downstairs. We'll take care of her, and of course, Mr. Doggett will see to all the funeral arrangements.
You realize, of course, Mrs. Bartlett, that I cannot sign a death certificate at this stage?
Does that mean there will have to be an inquest?
Possible. There will most certainly have to be a post-mortem examination. Oh, I don't wish to distress you. You've suffered enough as it is. But a mere formality.
How soon could the examination be carried out? Today?
That is rather precipitating matters. It will require a pathologist and at least one other doctor besides myself. I doubt if it could be arranged conveniently before tomorrow at the earliest.
Oh, please try to get the horrible business over as soon as possible.
You may rest assured. Be good enough to ask Mrs. Bartlett to step upstairs, will you please?
Yes, Doctor. It's Dr. Leach. They've finished, and they want you, my dear.
Oh, yes, I'll go up. You wish to see me, Doctor?
Just step into this spare room for a moment, Mrs. Bartlett. Thank you. Mrs. Bartlett, we have subject, of course, to confirmation by the analyst. We have almost certainly discovered the cause of your husband's death.
Yes? What is it?
Liquid chloroform.
After that, things began to move quickly. The rooms in Claverton Street were sealed, and the key handed to the coroner. With the exception of Thomas Bartlett, however, no suspicion of foul play was as yet in the mind of anyone. Pending the inquest, Adelaide went to stay with Mr. and Mrs. Matthews at Herne Hill.
Now, my dear, don't worry. By this time tomorrow, it will all be over. You poor child, so young for such an ordeal. But at least you'll have the satisfaction of hearing yourself praised by that coroner. He can't fail to do so after the way you nursed and cherished poor dear Edwin right to the very end. Oh, I'm almost forgetting. That nice Mr. Dyson's waiting in the hall. I'll ask him in here, and you two can have a quiet talk.
Thank you, Mrs. Matthews.
Come in, Mr. Dyson. There, Adelaide will make you at home. Poor dear. She's quite naturally feeling the strain.
Well, quite a stranger. Where have you been hiding these last few days?
Not hiding, but visiting my father in Dorset to seek his advice. Adelaide, I can stand this no longer. The chloroform. The liquid chloroform.
What of it?
Can't you see? This means ruin for me, utter ruin. My career, my whole life, I shall be disgraced, unfrocked.
You speak in terms of yourself. Have you no thought for me, what I have at stake? Oh, try to keep your head. I'll not incriminate you if you don't incriminate me.
But they're sure to trace the chloroform. The chemists... Oh, no. I must make a clean breast of everything before they find out for themselves. It's my only hope.
I tell you, I never used the stuff. Don't you believe me?
But the bottle I gave you, where is it?
I threw it from the window of the railroad carriage on the way down here.
And I too disposed of the 3 empty bottles on Putney Heath. Even that was a sign of guilt. But now I must hurry and confess everything to the authorities before it's too late.
No.
It's my only hope. Here's the watch you say Edwin left me in his will. I must...
That I say. Don't you dare profess ignorance of the fact that Edwin altered his will in July, cutting out the marriage clause and making you and Baxter his sole executors?
Nevertheless, you must take back this watch. I must disassociate myself with everything.
So, you think I killed him and you're afraid?
Oh, I don't know what to think.
Why, you're no better than... Leave me. Get out of my sight and do your worst.
But Adelaide, the chloroform.
Oh, damn the chloroform.
Is everything all right, my dear? I thought I heard...
Go on, tell her. Tell Mrs. Matthews, the whole world, what I did. I killed him.
My dear!
Mr. Foreman, have you arrived at a finding?
We have, Your Honor.
What is your finding?
We find that the deceased, Edwin Bartlett, died from the effects of poisoning by liquid chloroform, that the poison was administered willfully and with murderous intent by the widow, Adelaide Blanche Bartlett. We also find that the Reverend George Dyson was an accessory to the act.
Adelaide was fortunate enough to brief the services of Edward Clark, later Sir Edward Clark, QC, Member of Parliament and Solicitor General, who threw himself wholeheartedly into Adelaide's cause. From the outset, he realized that the entire case would hinge on the medical evidence. And for this reason, he spent days on end in the British Museum until he had studied every known book upon chloroform. The trial began at the Old Bailey on April the 12th, 1886, before the Honourable Mr. Justice Wills, the Attorney General, Sir Charles Russell, QC MP, himself appearing for the Crown, while George Dyson was represented by counsel of less distinction. By now, the case had become a top-line sensation throughout the entire country, and crowds fought to gain admittance to the public gallery.
Adelaide Blanche Bartlett and George Dyson, you stand jointly charged with the willful murder of Edwin Bartlett at some time between 10:30 p.m. on the night of December 31st, 1885, and the small hours of January 1st, 1886. How say you, Adelaide Blanche? Are you guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
How say you, George Dyson? Are you guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
My lord, as counsel for the male prisoner, I beg your lordship's leave to make application herewith for a separate trial.
Have you any objections, Mr. Clark, to the prisoners being tried separately?
No objections, my lord.
Has the Crown any objections, Sir Charles?
May it please your lordship, it is not the intention of the Crown to proceed further with the case against the male prisoner.
Do I understand you to mean that the prosecution is not proposing to offer any evidence against the prisoner Dyson?
That is so, my lord. It is in fact the Crown's intention to ask for a verdict of not guilty in that case and call him as a witness.
Silence in court!
In that case, Mr. Foreman, you will return a verdict of not guilty against the male prisoner.
Not guilty, my lord.
The prisoner will be released at once.
My lord, members of the jury, the story which is about to be unfolded to you is one of which, at first glance, you may be inclined to assess as being no more than the sordid story with which we are all too familiar, that of the eternal triangle. Nevertheless, there are certain aspects of this case which, I venture to suggest, will cause you to stretch your imagination to the fullest extent.
As Sir Charles Russell outlined the case for the Crown, it seemed there could be little or no defence for the lonely, deserted figure in the dock, in face of the mountain of evidence likely to be proved against her.
I will not insult your intelligence, gentlemen, by dwelling upon the motive in this case. It is the intention of the prosecution to prove to you, by the evidence of experts and other witnesses, in such a way as to leave no reasonable doubt in your minds that the prisoner at the bar, having every cause for wishing her husband out of the way, prevailed upon her lover to obtain by purchase the means by which to carry out her carefully planned design. That, having rendered her sleeping victim insensible by waving under his nose a handkerchief or other material soaked in chloroform, she then proceeded to pour the remainder of the deadly liquid down his throat, producing death, a silent death, gentlemen, in the space of a few minutes. That, my lord, members of the jury, will be the case for the Crown. Call Thomas Bartlett.
As may be supposed, Adelaide's father-in-law was at pains to paint her in the blackest possible light, giving his evidence with ill-concealed relish and sparing nothing in an attempt to strengthen the long chain of circumstances against her. Presently, Edward Clark rose to cross-examine.
Did your son at any time, Mr. Bartlett, express his views upon matrimony?
He never complained, if that's what you mean, but then he wasn't the kind.
No, I'm asking you whether you ever expressed his views upon marriage in general.
Well, yes.
What did he say?
He said he thought a man should be allowed 2 wives. One to do the housework and t'other to take out like.
Please enlighten me. Was it intended that both these partners would serve us as bedfellows?
I couldn't see, my lord. All he said was one to do the housework and one to take out. I heard a man the other night as how he could do with 40 wives just in the same way.
The court is not interested, Mr. Bartlett, in the observations of your friends.
Were those views upon marriage expressed by your son in the presence of his wife?
Oh, he said it more than once, in a joking sort of way.
In the presence of his wife?
Aye.
In March of last year, did you, at the request of the prisoner and your son, sign a document, the working of which was as follows? Having made certain statements reflecting on the character of Mrs. Adelaide Bartlett, wife of my son Edwin Bartlett, which statements I now discover to be unfounded and untrue, I, Thomas Bartlett, do hereby withdraw all such statements and apologize for having made them.
I did.
Were they statements reflecting upon the prisoner's moral character?
They were.
Why did you make those statements in the first place?
Because they were true.
Do you still say they are true?
Yes.
Then this document signed by you is in fact a false declaration.
I was made to sign it.
Were you made to give evidence in this court today?
My lord, I really must protest.
I do not think Mr. Clark seeks by his question to cast any aspersion upon the Crown. Indeed, I sincerely hope he does not.
May it please your lordship. The line of probing is directly, entirely against the character of this witness. But in order to placate my learned friend, and if your lordship pleases, I will put the question in another way.
Very well.
From the start, you have gone out of your way, have you not, to give every assistance and more in the building up of the case against the prisoner?
No more than was me duty.
While he was yet alive, it is a fact, is it not, that your son did everything possible to protect his wife from you?
I wouldn't say that.
I further put it to you that you are the kind of person who makes a statement one day and completely retracts it, either in writing or otherwise, the next to suit your purpose.
No, sir.
No further questions.
One by one, the witnesses for the prosecution helped to build up a damning case against the prisoner. Mr. and Mrs. Doggett and their maid Alice, Mrs. Matthews, they did not all do so willingly, but every little bit helped to strengthen the ever-growing chain of evidence. And then, on the fourth day of the trial...
Call the Reverend George Dyson.
Oh, have that person ejected. I will tolerate no demonstrations or interruptions in this court where a human being's life hangs in the balance. If there is a repetition, I shall cause the public gallery to be cleared.
Dyson gave his evidence reluctantly and with bowed head. Under the subtle guidance of the Attorney General, he made full confession of his romance with Adelaide, right up to the time of their last interview at Mrs. Matthews' house, and of his friendship with Edwin Bartlett, omitting nothing. In all, his examination in chief lasted for more than a day, but at the end of that time, Edward Clark had only few questions to put to him.
Supposing Edwin Bartlett had died from natural causes on January 1st of this year, would the rules of your calling have permitted you to marry the prisoner at the bar? I mean, of course, after a respectable period of mourning.
Yes.
Nevertheless, you have given the prisoner to understand, had you not, that under the rules of your calling you were not permitted to marry for another 2 years.
Yes, that is so.
When you visited these apothecaries, Mr. Dyson, what reasons did you offer them for wishing to purchase liquid chloroform?
For the purpose of cleaning my clothes.
But that was not the truth, was it?
No.
As one in holy orders, Mr. Dyson, are you in the habit of stating falsehoods?
Oh, no.
But you did so to 3 different persons within the space of a few hours. Can you uphold any good reason, therefore, why the jury should not feel disposed to give you altogether, to ignore you as a witness for the Crown?
You forget, sir, I am on oath.
No, do not forget. I suggest that a man of your calling is every bit as much on oath in a chemist shop as he is on the witness stand here today. No further questions.
Dr. Leach was the first of the medical experts. He proved a conscientious and impartial witness as he related in great detail the entire history of Edwin Bartlett's illness. When Edward Clark rose to cross-examine, it was evident from the start that his hours of study in the British Museum had not been wasted.
You have considerable experience, have you not, Dr. Leach, in the administration of anesthetics?
I have.
Then you will agree with the quantity of anesthetic required to produce insensibility differs greatly with the individual.
Oh, yes.
It is a fact, is it not, that Edwin Bartlett was exceptional, to say the least of it, in his powers of resistance to all forms of sedatives?
That is so.
Even a bromide powder failed to induce sleep.
Yes.
Whereas on the afternoon of December 31st, while at the dentist, his resistance to nitrous oxide gas was surprising, even to one of your experience.
It was.
At the same time, that does not mean to say that too strong a dose of, say, ether or other anesthetic might not have been had fatal results, just as with a normal patient.
That is so.
In other words, from the point of view of being rendered insensible by anesthesia, Edwin Bartlett was a case demanding exceptional skill and experience, was he not?
He was.
Now, throughout Edwin Bartlett's illness, you were in the habit of visiting him several times a day?
I was.
So that during those weeks you came to know the prisoner and her husband intimately?
Quite intimately.
When in the small hours of January the 1st you were summoned to Claverton Street and found this man dead, despite the fact that only a few hours previously you had pronounced him fit and healthy, did the least shadow of suspicion cross your mind that this might be a case of foul play?
No.
In what state did you find the accused upon your arrival?
She was greatly distressed.
We know it is easy to be wise after the event, but looking back on things now, did she exhibit by word, deed, or gesture the least sign of guilt?
She did not.
Chloroform is a very volatile substance, is it not? In other words, its traces disappear rapidly from the system after death.
The traces of chloroform disappear fairly quickly, but not so its effects upon the system.
Which effects are similar in character to those of many other irritant poisons.
Yes.
And that applies equally to liquid chloroform and the vapor. That's if a post-mortem were carried out upon a person a few hours after their death. You would expect to find the presence of chloroform considerably more marked than if the autopsy were performed, say, in a couple of days.
That is so.
When you told Mrs. Bartlett that a post-mortem would have to be held, what was her immediate reaction?
She wanted it over and done with as soon as possible.
Did she not press you to have it take place that very same day?
Yes, she did.
So that in spite of the medicine chess of which we have heard so much, in spite of all her suggested knowledge of medicine, by insisting on the earliest possible autopsy, Mrs. Bartlett, if really guilty, was sacrificing the one big chance in her favor, that of the time element, whereby the traces of chloroform in the body might have been allowed to disappear. Thank you, Dr. Leach. No further questions.
As the trial went on from day to day, Edward Clark made a point of being in court each morning, 10 minutes before the appointed hour, in order that, when the prisoner was brought up from the cells below, she would see at least one friendly face among all the others. As a result, she scribbled a short, pathetic note which was duly handed to her counsel. It contained but these few words: "Sir, I am grateful. Although I do not look at you, I know you are there." Far from becoming bored by the welter of technical detail now being thrashed out between counsel and the medical experts, public interest in the case was mounting daily. Among many others, the most important witness for the Crown was Dr. Thomas Stevenson, Doctor of Medicine, Professor of Medical Jurisprudence at Guy's Hospital, and Home Office Analyst. In great detail, Dr. Stevenson described his experiments with the remains handed to him and his opinion as to their condition.
From all your analysis and examinations, Dr. Stevenson, what conclusions do you draw?
I would judge that a considerable quantity of liquid chloroform had been swallowed within a very short time of death, and that death was a direct result of it.
Now, is it or is it not, according to your experience, possible to produce a state of insensibility during sleep?
I have not done that myself, but I know of many instances in which it has been done.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson.
I believe I am right in saying, Doctor, that chloroform has been used as an anesthetic in this country for about 40 years. It was early in 1847 that Dr. Morton first used it.
Yes, it's 47.
And from the first, the characteristics of chloroform have been the subject of great interest to the medical profession.
Yes, they have.
Can you refer me to any recorded case anywhere of murder by the administration of liquid chloroform?
No, I cannot.
Now, I understand you to say, Dr. Stevenson, that in this case of death by inhalation, you would not necessarily expect to find...
It was in the cross-examination of this witness that Edward Clark really displayed the wealth of technical knowledge absorbed by him during the preceding weeks. Using that knowledge to the full, he sought to prove that the post-mortem examination on Edwin Bartlett had revealed no evidence whatever of chloroform, vapor, having been inhaled shortly before death, as suggested by the Crown, that in fact all the usual prominent signs of this were conspicuous by their absence. Furthermore, he went on to challenge Dr. Stevenson's opinion on several points by producing the written testimony of other great authorities.
And now, Dr. Stevenson, you have spoken of the possibility of administering chloroform to persons while asleep. Were you referring to adults?
Yes.
Is it not a fact that attempts to administer the vapor almost invariably wake the patient?
Not invariably.
And Dalbo, the Frenchman, is a very great authority on the subject, is he not?
Oh, yes, indeed.
You know Winter Blythe's book on poisons?
I do.
I find this reference to Dalbo on page 136 of Winter Blythe. Dalbo has made some interesting experiments to ascertain whether, under the circumstances, a sleeping person might be anesthetized. The main results seem to be that it can only be done with the greatest skill and care. In 75% of the cause, the individual awoke immediately upon being exposed to the vapor. This cautious and scientific narcosis, therefore, is not likely to be used by criminal classes, or, if used, to be successful. I do not wish to take up the court's time, Dr. Stevenson, but I can give you many other references upon the subject, all recognized as very great authorities, and without exception they go to show that to anesthetize a sleeping adult offers the very gravest difficulties, even to an expert. I put it to you that to an ordinary individual, such as the prisoner, it would be a virtual impossibility.
I do not wish to comment myself to that extent.
By supposing by some miracle an inexperienced person had achieved this and proceeded to pour liquid into the victim's mouth, the liquid would not go down all at once, as in normal swallowing. Some of it would linger at the back of the throat for a while, would it not?
Very likely.
And if the liquid had been chloroform, you would find inflammation there after death.
Yes, probably.
In the case of Mr. Bartlett, did you find such inflammation in the soft parts of the mouth and throat?
No.
I put it to you, therefore, Dr. Stevenson, that there are no post-mortem indications whatever that this man was first rendered insensible by inhalation and that the liquid was then forced down his throat.
I do not propose, sir, to commit myself. I have merely stated my opinions.
Then perhaps you will be good enough to answer this one final question. With all your knowledge, experience, and skill, if you had before you this problem, the object of administering liquid chloroform in order to produce the death of a sleeping adult, would it not be highly delicate and a difficult operation?
It would.
No.
It was now the turn of the defence, but Edward Clark called no witnesses. Neither did he run the risk of putting Adelaide in the box and thus laying her open to the withering crossfire of the Attorney General. Instead, he relied entirely upon his own speech to the jury, a speech which, to this day, still ranks as one of the most brilliant ever delivered in defence of a prisoner charged with murder. Piece by piece, he took the medical evidence offered by the Crown and used it to show that, far from pointing to the prisoner's guilt, it went to show conclusively that the deed could never have been accomplished by the accused, least of all in the manner that was the foundation of the case for the Crown. His speech lasted several hours, and even in its closing stages was delivered to the court that listened in tense silence to every word.
Gentlemen, there is no miracle worked by the grocer's wife under circumstances where it could not have been worked by the most experienced doctor who ever gave himself to the study of this matter. If you believe the prisoner's original statement before the coroner, and how dare you reject it, she acquired the chloroform for the purpose of inducing peaceful and necessary sleep upon a husband who, for weeks, had suffered the mental torment of hypochondria. and upon whom all the sedatives prescribed by his doctor had failed to take effect. Gentlemen of the jury, there is no limit to human endurance, and I would say to you that this woman, who night after night had unselfishly and dutifully sacrificed her own sleep, was at the end of her tether. And having never before kept any secret from her husband, she showed him the bottle of chloroform and told him the reasons for having acquired it. Thus there was, unhappily, the putting within the reach of this deadly poison. But there was no more. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to believe that what I now submit to you as having followed the act is the one and only possible explanation in this case. That after his wife had left the room to wash and change her clothes for the night, that husband, broken by imaginary illness and in acute morbid relapse, reached for the bottle of chloroform, emptied it into a tumble, and swallowed the content, stifling the agony which must have resulted from the ears of his wife and those of the rest of the household, that by the time the prisoner returned to the room he was insensible, as though sleeping soundly. Gentlemen, what joy must have filled her unsuspecting heart! So much so that within a few moments she herself had surrendered as long last to the blessing of peaceful sleep. But not for long, for she awakened a few hours later, only to find the full horror of the situation and her husband gone forever. Gentlemen, that husband was her friend. Despite certain abnormal traits in his character, no shred of evidence has been placed before you to show that these two were not the very best of friends. But now even that friend is gone, and she stands alone in the world. Nevertheless, gentlemen, I say she is still not without a friend, for she will find one here today in the spirit which guides your judgment. The spirit of justice is here in this court to protect her in the hour of her utmost need. It has strengthened, I hope, my voice. It will speak in calm, measured tones when my lord deals with the evidence that he had roused suspicion, and that spirit will speak in a firm, unfaltered voice when the verdict tells to the whole world that your judgment of Adelaide Bartlett is not guilty.
Such oratory, you might think, was calculated to win over the most hardened of jurymen. Also, as often happens in cases of this kind, public sentiment during the last few days had turned in Adelaide's favour. But by an age-old custom of legal procedure, where the Crown was represented by the Attorney General or the Solicitor General, it was their right to have the final word to the jury. Of this, Sir Charles Russell availed himself to the full, and in a long speech, delivered at times in scathing terms, he sought, bit by bit, to neutralize the terrific defense put up by Edward Clarke.
Gentlemen, we are back to this. Death caused by the introduction into the stomach of an irritant poison. How did it get there is the sole question of this case. It is not suggested by the defense or anyone else that it could have got there accidentally. Therefore, it is reduced to these 2 points of whether the man did it himself with suicidal intent or whether someone else did it with criminal intent. If someone else did it, that someone can be no one but the prisoner at the bar. In spite of the brilliant oratory and profound technical knowledge displayed by my learned friend, it is not for you to ponder too deeply as to the exact methods by which the deed was accomplished. Rather, it is for you to consider, upon the evidence, whether it was accomplished. Now, did he do it with suicidal intent? Everything is against such a theory. He was prosperous in his business. He had apparently known no illness before December of last year. By December 26th, he had practically regained his health. On December 31st, he was in exceptionally good spirits, making his arrangements for the next morning and indeed for the future. All point to a man who felt the enjoyment of life. And yet, gentlemen, you are asked to believe that this compliant husband, who had in effect made over his wife to another man, deliberately does an act which removes the only obstacle standing in the path of complete union between the wife and her lover.
My learned friend has said that the spirit of justice sits in the jury box and will be the friend and protector of the prisoner at the bar. Let me say, the spirit of justice cannot be evoked or conjured up to protect a criminal. Even as justice is blind, so ought justice to be deaf to the approaches, to prejudice or to passion. Apply your minds, I pray, gentlemen, to that spirit, and if, after you have heard my lord and have retired from the box to consider the responsibilities placed on you, if you then find yourselves unable to accept this theory of suicide, even though you may not be able to state with accuracy the exact method by which the deed was accomplished, then it is your duty to lay the guilt at the woman's door.
The judge's summing up was fair and impartial, and as the jury retired to consider their verdict, tense, eager crowds waited, not only in the court itself and the corridors of the Old Bailey, but also in the streets outside. The jury were absent for more than 3 hours, and then...
Mr. Foreman, have you arrived at a verdict?
We have.
Do you find the prisoner guilty or not guilty?
We find that whilst grave suspicion attaches to the prisoner...
Then you find the prisoner not guilty?
Not guilty.
How then did Edwin Bartlett come to swallow liquid chloroform? It seems we shall never know, for the affair was handed down to posterity as the great Pimlico mystery, and to this day is still regarded as one of the most outstanding cases in the history of medical jurisprudence. But what of Adelaide and George Dyson? Instead of bringing them closer together, death had shattered their romance beyond repair. From that day also, Dyson was disowned by his church, and in due course sought refuge and obscurity in the cloisters of a monastery. As for Adelaide, she changed her name, and well, isn't that the very reason why some people do change their names? As an added note to this court proceeding, Sir James Paget, the greatest surgeon of the time, who said, Adelaide Bartlett was no doubt rightly and justly acquitted, but now that is all over, she owes it to science to tell us how she did it.
And the sweet Adelaide is not guilty? Really? Then, as we see in so many high-profile trials, if not her, then who? We know Adelaide and George virtually disappeared after the trial. What took place on that New Year's Eve, 1885? We can only speculate now. I trust you feel safe knowing someone may have gotten away with murder. It brings me back to my own case. Someone, a former enemy, of which I have many, may be toying with me. I mean the letters, the brake lines being cut to my red barchetta, the poisoning of my whiskey. It reeks to high heaven of the antics of my former arch nemesis, Alexander Vedder, who leapt to his death off a bridge into a fast-flowing river and then over a waterfall in an attempt to escape me. His body was never recovered. Thank you for joining us for Friday Night Vedder Mysteries. Join us next week